Hi guys, it's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zicree of Space Command, and we're here today to talk about Tomorrowland, which I just saw recently, the new movie by Brad Bird and Damon Lindelof. Brad Bird, of course, did The Incredibles and Iron Giant and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Damon Lindelof is the co-creator and showrunner of Lost and also co-writer of Prometheus. And I loved the first two-thirds of this movie. It's about an amazing futuristic city. It deals with the future's past, the wonderful gleaming cities that we envisioned in the earlier days of science fiction, and another dimension where a place like this has been built. And the first two-thirds, I was totally with the movie, totally loved it, and then for me the final third just kind of falls apart. So, but I wanted to speak about the movie and also Walt Disney's Tomorrowland, which of course is the inspiration for this film, and just kind of put it a little bit in its historical context, because Walt opened the park in 1959, Disneyland. I grew up here in Los Angeles, so every 6 months or so I would go to Disneyland, and I actually went to Disneyland when they had the original version of Tomorrowland there, including the sets for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, because there weren't enough things to put in Tomorrowland when the park opened, so Walt had just finished making that movie, and he put the sets from that film into Tomorrowland, and they were gorgeous sets, just amazing. And they also had the Rocket to the Moon, which was a phenomenal ride, initially hosted by TWA, and then McDonnell Douglas. And you'd go into this waiting room and wait for the countdown to where you could get into the rocket, and then you'd take a trip to the moon, and you'd experience weightlessness and meteor attacks and all sorts of things, and you'd see the surface of the moon, and it was just a phenomenal ride and wonderful. And I wish it were still there. I'd go on it right now. And the rocket, of course, was a needle-nosed rocket, very much like what we're doing on Space Command. And then later they changed it to Mission to Mars, which was okay, but not as thrilling as the original. And they also had the House of Tomorrow at Disneyland, which was a house made entirely of plastic. And when they ultimately decided to demolish it, they took a wrecking ball to it, and the wrecking ball bounced off. And they actually had to dismantle the house piece by piece to take it apart. So it truly was the future. And they had the inner space ride where you'd shrink down to the size of a molecule. That was built later in the 60s. And Tomorrowland really was, at Disneyland, was a step into the future that we had envisioned in science fiction from the 30s on, and even the 20s, because Metropolis really is the first visual representation of that kind of gleaming future. And then we saw it again in Things to Come in the 30s, H.G. Wells's movie. And the first literal representation where millions of people got to see it in the flesh was the 1939 New York World's Fair. And interestingly enough, the prequel book to Tomorrowland, Before Tomorrowland, is set in the 39 fair, and there's a teenage boy named Lee Brackett, which is a nod to the very famous female science fiction writer Lee Brackett, who was a mentor to Ray Bradbury and co-writer on the movies The Big Sleep with William Faulkner and Empire Strikes Back with Lawrence Kasdan. And interestingly enough, Lee Brackett died just beginning Empire Strikes Back, so they kept the credit on the movie as sort of a nod to her and to all she had contributed to the genre, even though the primary work was done by Lawrence Kasdan on that script. But Tomorrowland is really examining the future that we thought we would have, with flying belts and monorails and all of that. And the monorail, of course, was another feature of the original Tomorrowland, and it was terrific with this bubble top. I just loved it. And Ray Bradbury, who was a huge fan of Tomorrowland, the Disney park, he loved Disneyland in its entirety, told me that back in the early days, shortly after they unveiled the monorail ride at Disneyland, Allweg, the company that made that monorail, offered to Los Angeles to build an entire monorail system for Los Angeles, and they would do it for free if they could just keep the revenues for the first 5 years. And sadly, the city turned them down, and it would be such a wonderful city to have a monorail system running throughout Los Angeles. It would be very in keeping with this city, as opposed to the metro rail system that we built instead. But again, the movie Tomorrowland has a nod to all of these things, and it opens in the 1964 New York World's Fair. The movie does, and it recreates that because Disney had several rides that they built for the 64 fair, including It's a Small World and Carousel of Progress, which then moved to Disneyland when the fair closed. And Carousel of Progress was a great ride with these robots, audio animatronic robots, looking like human beings, showing the technological worlds of the past and the technological world of the future. And the song, It's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, that was on that ride, is featured in the movie Tomorrowland. So there's a very clever nod to all of these future visions that Disney promulgated in the 50s and 60s. Walt was a huge fan of the space program and did a TV show in the 50s called into Space that showed what that future would be, and he had Willy Ley and Werner von Braun, two of the German space scientists, on that show, talking about what that future would be. And in fact, Eisenhower insisted that all of his people watch that show, and Disney really was a great popularizer of the notion of that we should go into space, that we should land on the moon and Mars, and even with Disney World, he created Epcot, which he originally envisioned as the experimental prototype city of tomorrow, where it wouldn't have just been an attraction, it would have been an entire city. And people with just pedestrians, no cars allowed, just electrical vehicles running in the city. So it was very forward-looking even back then when Walt was launching it in the 70s. It was one of the last things he worked on. And so with Tomorrowland, another thing that's great in Tomorrowland is George Clooney is the ostensible movie star of Tomorrowland, but there's a little girl who plays a robot, and she's just spectacular, and she's really the standout in the film. So, and the film also has a character named Hugo Gernsback, who is named after the father of modern science fiction magazines. Hugo Gernsback was a publisher and editor who published amazing stories and a lot of popular scientific and science fiction magazines in the 1920s. And the Hugo Award, which is the top award in science fiction, is named after him. So, this is a movie that really has a knowledge of both literary and movie science fiction, as well as how these futuristic concepts worked into our popular psyche from the 1930s on. In fact, it even goes back to Tesla and Thomas Edison and Eiffel and these guys ostensibly starting Tomorrowland in the backstory of the film. So it even goes back actually to the 1880s and 1890s, and you know when even you can even go back further to the 1860s when Jules Verne was writing, and so it's really going back to the history of modern science fiction in that way. And so for all of that, it's kind of getting a lot of those things right, but in terms of storytelling, it goes way off the rails. And so in short, my basic thought would be, it's worth watching, it's worth seeing, particularly if you're a devotee, as I am with Space Command, of that style of future past. But just be aware that the pieces are often more wonderful than the whole. Though there is a journey into Tomorrowland in the film that's quite spectacular and quite thrilling. And at one point there you see people getting aboard a spaceship, and they say there's a seat for one more. And I think all of us who queue into that would love to be on that ship and rocketing off into space, which is, I guess, what I'm doing now with Space Command, where I have a studio full of my own spaceship sets, and we're editing the movie and working on the new trailer and getting ready for WesterCon and Comic-Con. But I just wanted to share my thoughts about Tomorrowland with you, and just if you want to comment, share, spread the word about Mr. Sci-Fi. We're going to be launching the audio podcast very soon. We'll let you know all about that. But that's about it for now, and thanks very much. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye, guys.